Eleanor Whitmore had always been a woman who loved quietly. For 6 decades, she had moved through life like a soft breeze, gentle, consistent, and often unnoticed. Her days were filled with routine, tending to her garden, reading worn-out classics in her cozy armchair, and occasionally helping neighbors with small chores. She wasn't famous, nor rich, nor loud, but she had given her everything to one thing: her daughter, Vanessa. Her 60th birthday arrived on a warm Sunday in June. The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of her living room as Eleanor carefully arranged her floral print dress, the one Vanessa had bought for her 2 years ago. She had spent the entire week preparing for this day, though not one to expect grandeur. Eleanor had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that her daughter would plan something special, not for the attention or the gifts, but to feel, just once, like she mattered. Vanessa was a name known in the tech world, founder of Neuronova, an AI-based wellness startup. She was celebrated as a genius disruptor on Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. Her interviews spoke of ambition, perseverance, and independence, but rarely, if ever, did Vanessa mention her mother. Eleanor never complained about it. She would smile through her daughter's rising fame, cheering from the sidelines while clipping out articles and pinning them on the fridge with shaky hands. The birthday party was held at Vanessa's downtown penthouse. It wasn't Eleanor's style: chrome furniture, glass walls, minimalist art that looked like it belonged in a science museum, but she told herself it didn't matter. Her daughter had organized something. That alone meant the world. Eleanor walked in, clutching a small gift bag in one hand and a nervous smile in the other. The room was filled with Vanessa's friends and colleagues, all in their late 20s or 30s, holding champagne flutes and talking about funding rounds, burn rates, and IPOs. No one noticed her at first. She stood by the entrance, awkwardly, the music pulsing against her chest, her ears catching phrases she didn't understand. Eleanor. Vanessa's voice finally pierced through the noise. She was dressed in a sleek, all-black outfit, too formal, too corporate for a birthday, but that was Vanessa's style. Elegance with an edge. She gave her mother a quick hug, more out of duty than affection. I didn't think you'd actually come this early, Vanessa said with a tight smile. We're still waiting for a few people. I didn't want to be late, Eleanor replied, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. She offered the gift bag, which held a hand-knitted scarf and a photo album she had spent weeks compiling. Vanessa took it and placed it casually on a side table without looking inside. Thanks, I'll open it later. The party rolled on. People came and went. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed across the room, but Eleanor sat on a corner couch, mostly alone, like a forgotten accessory in her daughter's curated life. She tried striking up conversations, but was quickly outpaced by tech jargon and superficial small talk. A few people gave her polite nods. Others offered patronizing smiles. But no one truly saw her. Then came the toast. Vanessa tapped her glass with a spoon and raised her voice to quiet the room. Everyone, thank you for coming. I know today is technically about my mother turning 60, but let's be real, she's probably just happy to be surrounded by young, successful people for once. The crowd chuckled. Eleanor's smile faltered. Vanessa continued, her tone light but with a razor's edge. My mom is, well, she's old school. She still uses a flip phone and thinks Wi-Fi is magic. But hey, she gave birth to me, and look how far I've come. More laughter. This time louder. Eleanor's cheeks burned. She tried to laugh along, to play the part of the gracious guest, but each word sliced through her dignity like a shard of glass. She wasn't expecting poetry or heartfelt praise. But this mockery, dressed as humor, was unbearable. And honestly, Vanessa added with a smirk, when I was younger, I used to worry I'd turn out like her, stuck in a tiny house, reading dusty books, thinking crocheting was a career. But thank God I had ambition. The room erupted in laughter. Eleanor sat frozen, heart thudding so loudly she thought the floor might echo it. Her gift remained untouched, on the table, ignored like her presence. She looked around, hoping for one kind face, one empathetic glance, but all she saw were amused eyes and smug grins. Her world, once filled with quiet pride, shrank into a pinpoint of humiliation. She stood up slowly, gripping her purse. Her hands trembled. No one noticed, not even Vanessa. Without a word, Eleanor walked out of the party. The elevator ride down felt endless. When she reached the ground floor, she stepped outside into the humid evening air and finally let her tears fall. They weren't loud, theatrical sobs, but silent, heavy streams of betrayal. She hailed a cab, her voice barely steady. The driver didn't ask questions. She clutched her scarf on her lap, the one she had planned to give Vanessa later, with her initials embroidered on the corner. Eleanor stared at it for a long time, then stuffed it back in her bag. When she reached home, the silence welcomed her like an old friend. She changed out of her dress, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer she rarely opened. Then, she sat in her armchair and stared at the wall, not blinking, not speaking. Her mind replayed Vanessa's words over and over. A joke, a joke, a joke. That's what her daughter thought of her. Not a woman who stayed up late finishing school lunches. Not a woman who sold her jewelry to pay for college tuition. Not a woman who spent years tending to a sick husband while raising a child alone. Not a woman who gave up every dream so her daughter could live hers. Just a joke. The weight of it was unbearable, not because of what was said but because of who said it. Eleanor had no one to call. Most of her friends had either moved away, passed on, or grown distant with time. Her phone lit up once Vanessa had posted pictures of the party on social media with the caption, "Celebrated the fossil today. #just kidding. #blessed." She turned the phone off. For hours, Eleanor sat still, thinking not of revenge but of purpose, of worth, of all the years she had lived in shadows, being kind, being patient, being dependable. Where had it gotten her? Forgotten, mocked, discarded. But as the sky darkened, a new thought began to take shape, not a spark of anger, but of something sharper, something clearer. A voice deep inside her stirred one she hadn't heard in decades. "You were never a joke. They just stopped listening." Eleanor stood up and walked toward her bookshelf. She ran her fingers along the spines of old journals and notebooks, most filled with scribbles and ideas from years gone by. In the far corner was one labeled Eleanor's Business Ideas -1984. She pulled it out, dusted it off, and opened to the first page. A boutique idea, a therapy center for elderly women, a tech product for seniors, dreams she once had before life happened. As she flipped through the pages, something lit inside her, not rage, not bitterness, but resolution. Eleanor may have been invisible to Vanessa and her crowd, but she wasn't invisible to herself anymore. Tonight had broken her heart, but in its ruins, she found a map. And maybe, just maybe, she would follow it. Not to prove Vanessa wrong, but to finally prove herself right. The morning after the party felt heavier than any Eleanor had known in years. The sun rose as it always did, spilling soft light across her kitchen counter and casting shadows on the tiled floor. But today, it didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like a spotlight on everything she had lost: her dignity, her daughter's respect, and most of all, her own sense of self-worth. The silence in the room was so thick she could hear her own heartbeat, reminding her she was still here, still alive, even if yesterday's words echoed like a cruel joke. Eleanor moved slowly through her small house, her slippers shuffling against the floor. The smell of yesterday's perfume lingered faintly in the bedroom, sweet and floral, meant to make her feel elegant, but now it smelled like defeat. She glanced at herself in the mirror, her eyes swollen, hair tangled, and mouth pressed into a tight line. Last night's humiliation had left its imprint not just on her mind but on her face. She poured herself a cup of tea, though she didn't feel like drinking it, her hands wrapped around the warm mug out of habit, searching for comfort in something that had always soothed her. But even the tea tasted dull today. She sat down at the small table by the window and stared outside. The roses she had planted last spring were blooming vivid and alive. For a moment, she envied them. No one expected roses to prove themselves. No one laughed at a rose for being soft. Her gaze fell upon the bookshelf near the living room. The journals were still stacked neatly in the corner, as if waiting for her. She had pulled one out last night in a daze, but now her mind was clearer. Certainly not that, but focused. With trembling hands, she rose, walked over, and took out a few of the notebooks. Their covers were faded, the pages yellowing at the edges, but inside them lived pieces of a younger Eleanor, a woman filled with ideas, with ambition, with a vision that life had buried but never erased. She opened one and smiled faintly at the scrawled handwriting. Grandmother's Touch, a boutique for heritage, embroidery, and handmade comfort wear for seniors. Another page had a rough sketch of a logo, a pair of gentle hands holding a blooming thread. She flipped further and saw a draft for a newsletter, idea, partnership goals, even notes on how to use email marketing back from a time when she'd taken a free online course, but had to drop it to take care of Vanessa's school project. Each page reminded her of something precious she had given up, not because she was forced, but because she chose to. Eleanor had made sacrifices willingly. She didn't regret loving her daughter, but now, the realization dawned like a hard truth. Vanessa had never asked about these dreams, never encouraged them, never even respected them. She pulled out another journal from 1992. This one held notes for a therapeutic retreat center, safe space for widows and senior women to heal, share stories, and reconnect with themselves. Eleanor had thought of everything: diet plans, schedules, staff ideas, but again, it was abandoned mid-thought. The ink faded at the part where her husband had gotten sick. Life had turned her into a caretaker, then a single mother, and somewhere in all of that, Eleanor had vanished. But maybe she could return not to who she was, but to the woman she was supposed to become. She spent the next few hours reading, not just the journals, but books she hadn't touched in years: business guides, psychology articles, even beginner coding tutorials she'd once downloaded on a whim. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard of her old laptop, hesitant but curious. The keys felt stiff, but soon they began to respond. She Googled terms like how to start a small business at 60, women entrepreneurs over 50, funding for late career startups. The world had changed since she last dared to dream, and to her surprise, the digital space had made room for women like her. Articles celebrated silver entrepreneurs, forums were filled with widows and retirees building soap brands, podcasts, handmade goods empires. Eleanor's heart beat faster, not from fear, but excitement. Perhaps it wasn't too late. Still, that kernel of doubt sat in her stomach. Vanessa's voice returned again, that mocking tone laced with polished cruelty. She still uses a flip phone, crocheting like it's a career. The party hadn't just hurt, it had cracked something open. But now that it was broken, perhaps there was space to rebuild. She made a list. It wasn't fancy, just scribbles on a yellow notepad. 1. Learn how startups work. 2. Find funding opportunities. 3. Revisit boutique idea. 4. Understand online marketing. 5. Learn from someone, maybe Arthur. Her pen hesitated at that last name. Arthur Mendez. She hadn't seen him in over 10 years. He had been her late husband's college friend and an occasional guest at holiday dinners. A charming man with an encyclopedic knowledge of the stock market and a sharp wit. Eleanor remembered that after retiring early, he had mentioned investing in small ventures for fun. She hadn't thought of him since the funeral. Would he even remember her? Would he take her seriously? She picked up the landline phone. Yes, still a landline, and dialed the number from her address book. A part of her hoped it wouldn't connect, but it did. 3 rings, then a deep voice. Hello, Arthur. This is Eleanor Whitmore. A pause, then a warm, surprised chuckle. Well, now there's a name I haven't heard in years. They spoke for nearly an hour. Eleanor explained the birthday party only briefly. She didn't want pity. She focused on the journals, her ideas, her need to understand this new world of entrepreneurship. Arthur listened patiently. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said something that made her eyes sting. You've always been smarter than most of the men I invested in. You just never got the chance. Let's change that. They agreed to meet the next day. After hanging up, Eleanor sat very still. Something inside her had shifted. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but it was close. She looked around the room that had for years felt like the ending of her life, and now, strangely, felt like its beginning. The walls weren't closing in anymore. They were holding her up. She opened her closet and pulled out a box labeled Vanessa's Old School Projects. Inside were drawings, essays, science fair medals. Eleanor smiled at the memories. But then she noticed something odd. At the very bottom was a vision board Eleanor had made during Vanessa's elementary school open house 1, where parents were encouraged to share their dreams with the class. Most parents had scribbled, I want to travel, or I want to relax. Asterisk Eleanor's board said, I want to open a center where women can heal through crafts and shared stories. I want to remind people that no matter their age, they matter. She stared at that board for a long time. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time, they weren't just for sorrow. They were for rediscovery. She had let others define her narrative for far too long. Her husband, her daughter, even society. But now, perhaps for the first time in decades, she would begin defining herself. Asterisk that night, she didn't sleep early. She stayed up watching TED Talks on YouTube, reading success stories of women who had risen from ashes. She bookmarked articles, signed up for a free business course, and even posted anonymously in a startup forum. Is 62 old to launch a company? The responses came quickly. Never too late. My mom started at 65. You have wisdom most of us are still chasing. Each reply was like a small torch lighting her way forward. She looked around at her tiny living room, cluttered, a bit outdated, but hers. Then she looked at the journals again and whispered aloud to the quiet room. Maybe you weren't just old dreams. Maybe you were just early. Asterisk as dawn approached, Eleanor stretched her aching legs and shut off the computer. For the first time in years, she felt a fire inside her. Not for revenge, not yet, but for purpose. Asterisk she didn't want to humiliate Vanessa or prove her wrong. She wanted to prove herself right, to show that kindness wasn't weakness, that softness didn't mean insignificance, that years of sacrifice could bloom into something strong, something worthy. Asterisk, and maybe, just maybe, she would one day look her daughter in the eye not with bitterness, but with pride and say, you've called me a joke, but look who's laughing now. Asterisk the road ahead was long, the mountain steep, but Eleanor Whitmore had just taken her first real step. Eleanor awoke with a rare sense of clarity, the kind that comes not from rest but from resolve. The previous day's emotional turbulence had given way to something stronger, determination. There was no denying the sting of her daughter's cruel words, nor the shame she had swallowed at that party, but Eleanor had spent her life enduring. What she had never done, until now, was rise, not for others, for herself. And this new version of her didn't tremble at the thought of being underestimated. She was beginning to see it as her greatest advantage. Asterisk, she dressed simply that morning, a pressed cotton blouse, navy trousers, her favorite pearl earrings, quiet symbols of who she was and who she was becoming. A large notebook rested under her arm, filled with ideas, sketches, and messy plans that had kept her up half the night. And in her purse was the business card she had found tucked inside one of Vanessa's discarded gift bags years ago. Arthur Mendez, retired investor. She had kept it not out of necessity, but out of instinct. Now, it felt like fate. Asterisk the cafe where they agreed to meet was tucked in the corner of a leafy street in Old World Place with creaky chairs, real ceramic mugs, and a bookshelf where customers were free to leave or borrow paperbacks. Eleanor arrived early and chose a seat by the window. She ordered black coffee, strong, no sugar. She would need it. Asterisk Arthur walked in. 5 minutes later, silver-haired, tall, and wearing a blazer. That said, he still believed in dignity over comfort. His eyes widened when he saw her, then softened. He approached with a smile and opened his arms. Asterisk Eleanor Whitmore, still graceful as ever. Asterisk she smiled, genuinely. And you, still too generous with compliments. Asterisk they embraced, and for a moment, the years fell away. The awkwardness she had feared didn't arrive. Instead, they talked icily about old memories, about Eleanor's late husband, about Arthur's post-retirement boredom. But the pleasantries didn't last long. Eleanor opened her notebook, set it gently between them, and began to with hesitation, but with quiet confidence. Asterisk, I have an idea. Or rather, I've had several over the years. But this one, it's different. It's time. Asterisk, she explained the concept, a digital platform and physical boutique hybrid, specifically tailored for senior women, offering curated products, online support groups, and virtual workshops in crafts, wellness, and personal storytelling. The name, Rekindle. It symbolized revival, warmth, and the second bloom of life. Not just a brand, but a movement, a space that honored the dignity, wisdom, and creativity of women who had been pushed to society's margins. Asterisk Arthur listened, tapping his fingers thoughtfully. He didn't interrupt. Occasionally, he nodded or jotted a note on his napkin. When Eleanor finished, she waited, not with bated breath, but with earned poised at asterisk, he leaned back. You've been sitting on a goldmine. Asterisk, I've been sitting on fear, she replied, an obligation, and doubt, but now I've been handed a reason not to be afraid anymore. Asterisk, Arthur raised an eyebrow. Vanessa. Asterisk, she nodded, eyes clear. She lit the match. I just decided to use the flame differently. Asterisk, he sipped his coffee, then said, you're late to the game, yes, but sometimes the latecomers are the ones who disrupt everything, because they're not chasing trends, they're creating need. Asterisk, they spent hours at that cafe. Arthur helped her sketch out an early roadmap, market research, target audience, possible revenue streams, partnerships. He suggested she begin as a silent investor in a test project or startup to get a feel for the dynamics. Eleanor agreed. It would be her trial by fire, but on her terms. Asterisk, when she returned home, her living room transformed into a war room. Sticky notes on the walls, printouts on the dining table. Her laptop screen glowed late into the night. She joined women entrepreneur forums, introduced herself as LWA, a name that felt both familiar and new. She asked questions, read everything she could, and took furious notes. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she already knew. Life had taught her resilience, resourcefulness, empathic qualities no textbook could offer. Asterisk, Arthur called 2 days later with a proposal. I have a lead for you, he said. A startup, young, ambitious, and quietly desperate. They've got vision but no stability. They're looking for a new round of funding. You won't need to invest much, but you'll get a seat at the table. Asterisk, Eleanor felt a pang of nerves. What kind of startup? Asterisk, AI meets wellness, ironically, a similar field to Vanessa's, but this one has flaws you can help fix. I know the founder, and I know you'll make an impression. She agreed to meet them. The startup was called Surf, run by a 33-year-old former biotech researcher named Caleb. They were building an AI-powered wearable that monitored emotional stress and offered real-time calming techniques, breathing guides, memory recalls, and even musical therapy. The prototype worked, but the business end was a mess. Inconsistent marketing, clunky branding, and a fractured team. Asterisk, Eleanor walked into the meeting room, notebook in hand, blazer freshly pressed. Caleb looked at her with mild surprise. He had expected an investor, not someone's grandmother. But as she asked her first question about the retention model, his attitude began to shift. Asterisk, she dissected the business with surgical precision. Years of observing people, managing crises, and making ends meet had sharpened her instincts. Eleanor didn't talk like a typical investor. She talked like someone who wanted to build something human. By the end of the meeting, Caleb's skepticism had turned to curiosity. Asterisk, why do you want in? He asked, genuinely puzzled. Asterisk, Eleanor paused. Because your product has heart, but it lacks soul. You're designing for the future, but ignoring the wisdom of the past. You need someone who understands both. Asterisk, he sat back, then smiled. All right, you're in. 50,000 for 10%, plus advisory rights. Asterisk, Eleanor shook his hand. Deal. Asterisk, that night, she stared at the signed contract in her hands, her first official investment, her foot in the door. But more than that, it was her message to the world, quiet but undeniable, that she was no longer on the sidelines. Asterisk, Arthur called again. You just took your first bite, ready for the feast. Asterisk, she laughed, a full laugh, deep from the belly. I am. Asterisk, and then, just before ending the call, Arthur added something casually. By the way, Vanessa's company, Neuronova, they're in trouble. Word is, they overextended and lost a major investor. She's looking for new backing. Asterisk, the room went still. Asterisk, Eleanor's hand gripped the phone tighter. You're sure? Asterisk, I have contacts. I'm very sure. If she doesn't find new funds soon, she'll have to start letting go of equity. A silence passed between them, heavy with possibility. I want to know everything, Eleanor said. Asterisk, over the next week, Eleanor immersed herself in Neuronova public filings, product reviews, and investor forums. Vanessa had expanded too quickly. She had added features to her platform that alienated her original audience. Her new branding focused more on aesthetics than utility, while her followers still praised her. Industry insiders knew the truth: she was flailing. Asterisk, Eleanor didn't rush in. She waited. She watched, and then, when she saw that Vanessa's team had quietly posted an open to private funding notice on a specialized investor portal, she reached out through an anonymous holding company Arthur helped her set up. She used a pseudonymy, W Holdings. After a series of strategic negotiations, she made an offer that appeared as a lifeline: clean capital, no public oversight, freedom to operate. The terms were clear. EW Holdings would hold majority equity, but would act as a silent partner for the first 6 months. Vanessa never saw it coming. The deal was approved within days. Vanessa's desperation had made her blind to the finer details of the arrangement, and just like that, Eleanor became the majority owner of Neuronova. She sat in her quiet living room the night the transaction finalized. No champagne, no music, just the soft sound of a clock ticking and the flicker of a candle. In her lap rested a folder with Neuronova's latest quarterly report. Her company now, she didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't triumph. This was only the beginning. Eleanor knew what was coming. The confrontation, the confusion, the chaos. But she also knew herself now. Not as Vanessa's mother. Not as the woman mocked in a penthouse full of strangers, but as Eleanor Whitmore, visionary, investor, builder of worlds. She stared at her reflection in the window, lit by the dim lamp beside her, and she whispered, not in anger, but in promise. You laughed at me once. Now, you'll answer to me. The spark of vengeance had ignited, and Eleanor was just getting started. Vanessa had always prided herself on control. Control over her company, over her image, over the narrative she had so carefully crafted in the tech world as a fierce, independent disruptor. Her confidence came not from humility but from dominance of boardrooms, headlines, and occasionally, her mother's voice. She had long dismissed Eleanor as outdated, sentimental, and irrelevant in the fast-paced rhythm of innovation. But as she sat in her office overlooking the skyline, scrolling through financial forecasts and watching red numbers bleed across her laptop screen, that control felt like it was slipping fast. Neuronova's user base had plateaued. Engagement had dipped. Worse yet, several corporate clients were pulling out of long-term contracts, citing instability and vague concerns about the product's pivot from mindfulness to performance optimization. The rebranding, Vanessa had fonts, minimalist UI, and a celebrity-backed social campaign had impressed Instagram influencers but confused loyal users. The company had grown too fast, burning cash in pursuit of sleekness, forgetting the core purpose that once drew in everyday women struggling with anxiety and burnout. When her CFO, Mason, walked into her office with a grim look, Vanessa already knew the news wasn't good. They declined the second round, she asked, not looking up from her laptop. Mason nodded. Both of them. Sandcroft cited our burn rate. Linwell thinks we're overlevered. Vanessa exhaled sharply, pressing her fingers to her temple. Then find new blood. Someone who doesn't flinch at a few risks. He hesitated. We posted an investor call yesterday, got a few responses. One of them offered clean capital, no board control, minimal involvement, but they want a controlling stake. Her head snapped up. How much stake? 51%. Vanessa scoffed. They must think I'm desperate. He didn't reply. That silence hit her, harder than any boardroom insult. She leaned back. Who is it? They go by EW Holdings. Based in New Jersey. No detailed profile. But they've backed a few female-focused wellness startups recently. Quiet operators. Nothing shady. Just strategic. Vanessa looked out the window, her jaw clenched. If we don't accept, we'll have to start cutting product teams by next quarter. And staff morale is already shaky. This buys you time. She drummed her fingers on the desk. Fine. Set the meeting. It wasn't a meeting. In the traditional sense, the representatives of EW Holdings operated through intermediaries, legal teams, liaisons, virtual handshakes. Vanessa never got to see the face behind the firm. The contracts were clean, elegant, and protective of her current role as CEO, least for the first 6 months. She signed, reluctantly, and in doing so, unknowingly handed her mother the crown. Eleanor didn't celebrate immediately. The ink on the contracts was still fresh when she sat across from Arthur in a quiet restaurant 2 towns away, sipping lemon water and staring at her copy of the agreement. You're the majority shareholder of your daughter's empire. Arthur said, smiling faintly. You just became the most powerful person she doesn't know. She knows. Asterisk, I thought I'd feel more victorious, Eleanor admitted. Asterisk, give it time, he replied. Justice often takes a moment to sink in. Asterisk, Eleanor didn't want revenge in the cartoonish sense. She wasn't plotting public humiliation or televised takedowns. What she needed was to shift the balance, to remind Vanessa that the woman she dismissed, the one she laughed at, had more power in her than any tech accelerator or headline-grabbing founder. Asterisk, over the next few weeks, Eleanor dove into the company's structure. She read internal memos, watched product development meetings from investor portals, and studied user feedback. She noticed patterns Vanessa had missed. Users wanted simplicity, empathy, connection. Neuronova's new updates had stripped the platform of personality in favor of sterile efficiency. Eleanor took notes, marking potential changes, possible improvements. Asterisk, she met quietly with a few key advisors, developers, therapists, design consultants. Through EW Holdings, she hired a new product strategist under a different division and began work on a side project, Neuronova Grace, a stripped-back legacy version of the app tailored to older women, offering gentle audio therapy, daily affirmations, journaling features, and curated community circles. It was the kind of product Eleanor herself would have wanted when she was grieving, when she was invisible, when she felt like a joke. Asterisk, meanwhile, Vanessa began noticing strange shifts in the company's direction. Asterisk, marketing plans she hadn't approved were suddenly gaining traction. Designers were pushing to reintroduce the human warmth aesthetic they had abandoned months ago. A few influential therapists began reaching out, praising Neuronova Grace, and expressing interest in partnership. Asterisk, what the hell is Neuronova Grace? Vanessa barked in a meeting. Asterisk, her lead developer blinked. It was greenlit through investor recommendations. We thought you were aware. Asterisk, no, I wasn't, she snapped. And I don't appreciate being undermined. Asterisk, Mason tried to smooth it over. It's getting traction, Vanessa. The feedback is phenomenal. Our retention rates have tripled in the Grace beta, and we're seeing organic interest from clinics and retirement centers. Asterisk, Vanessa stared at the charts. The numbers didn't lie. Grace was working, but it wasn't hers, and that burned. She left the meeting early, pacing in her office, fists clenched. She typed up an email to EW Holdings, requesting a direct call with the majority stakeholder. She wanted to know who was behind this sudden shift in creative control. Who had the audacity to walk into her kingdom and start changing the bricks beneath her feet? Asterisk, the reply came 2 hours later. Asterisk, EW Holdings does not participate in operational meetings. All decisions are made within contractual discretion. You may submit proposals via your board liaison. It was a slap wrapped in politeness. Vanessa began spiraling. For someone who had thrived on certainty and dominance, this silent disruption was maddening. She held daily meetings to reassert herself, micromanaged departments she used to trust, and grew increasingly paranoid about loyalty. Employees whispered about her temper behind closed doors. Some started leaving, others secretly admired the new direction. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued her quiet orchestration. Every night, she studied user messages from the Neuronova Grace beta, messages from women like her. Asterisk, I finally feel seen. Asterisk, this app makes me feel like I'm talking to a friend, not a robot. Asterisk, thank you. I haven't written in a journal since my husband died. I cried today, in a good way. Asterisk, she printed those out, tucked them in a folder, and kept them beside her bed. It wasn't ego, it was fuel. Proof that she was creating something real, something her daughter had forgotten in her race toward applause. Asterisk, Arthur called one evening to share news. Vanessa's trying to buy back controlling shares. She's offering aggressive premiums. Let her try, Eleanor said. She might suspect you soon. Asterisk, good. Let her, and suspect she did. Vanessa, one sleepless night, sat on her living room floor surrounded by spreadsheets and share ledgers. Something about the name EW Holdings kept bothering her. The secrecy, the strategic positioning, the sudden warmth of the new features. It didn't feel like a stranger's hand. Asterisk, she opened a private investigation request through a third-party contact. Within 48 hours, a report arrived in her inbox. She opened it hesitantly, her heart pounding. Asterisk, primary stakeholder of EW Holdings, Eleanor Whitmore. The world stopped. She couldn't believe it at first. Couldn't even breathe. Her mother, the same woman she had called irrelevant, embarrassing, and out of touch, was the shadow behind her downfall and her salvation. Vanessa stood up, palms sweating, knocking over her coffee. Her breath quickened as rage, confusion, and disbelief warred in her chest. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a reckoning. And she didn't know whether to scream or collapse. But Eleanor, that evening, unaware that the veil had lifted, sat calmly by the window, sipping tea and reading a letter from a 68-year-old user who had said, Grace helped her reconnect with her granddaughter. She smiled to herself, not with smugness but with peace. The confrontation was inevitable now. But Eleanor was ready. Not to fight, not even to argue, but to stand, because she had built something real. And now, it was her daughter's turn to see it. Vanessa sat frozen in her office, the report from the private investigator lying like a live wire on her desk. She stared at her mother's name, Eleanor Whitmore, printed in black ink beneath the words, primary stakeholder of EW Holdings. Her breath caught in her throat. Every assumption she had ever made about her mother suddenly felt like a lie. Every cruel joke, every eye roll, every time she dismissed Eleanor's questions about her work or scoffed at her mother's attempts to understand, all of it now came back to her with scorching clarity. She wanted to deny it, wanted to believe this was a mistake. But deep down, she knew. No stranger could have known how to strike so precisely, so intimately. No outsider could have understood her blind spots and her flaws with such accuracy. It had been her mother guiding the change all along. The elegant simplicity of Nuranova Grace, the way her own control had been slowly but surgically removed from her hands. Eleanor had never raised her voice, never demanded the spotlight. She had simply outmaneuvered her with grace, patience, and brutal silence. Vanessa felt the room spinning. Her empire wasn't just shifting, it had already changed hands. She stormed out of the office and drove for over an hour. Barely aware of the turns she was taking, her mind replayed every interaction with her mother from the past year, the missed calls, the quiet dinners, the birthday party speech that, in hindsight, felt less like wit and more like cruelty. She had mocked the one person who truly understood her, and in doing so, handed her the weapon for retaliation. Eleanor was in the garden when Vanessa arrived unannounced. She was kneeling beside a row of tulips, gently patting the soil around their roots, her sun hat shielding her eyes from the afternoon glare. The house looked modest as always, but something about Eleanor's posture, calm, focused, unshaken, radiated a quiet power that unnerved Vanessa more than any raised voice ever could. Mom, Vanessa said sharply, standing near the gate. Eleanor looked up, her gloved hands still resting in the soil. Vanessa, she said softly, as if greeting her after a normal day. You bought my company. I did, Eleanor said, rising slowly, wiping her hands on a cloth. Didn't sound ashamed, didn't sound triumphant, just certain. Why? Vanessa's voice cracked, the edge between fury and disbelief clear. Was this all some kind of elaborate revenge scheme? Eleanor took a moment before answering. No, she said finally. It was survival. And then, it became purpose. Vanessa laughed bitterly. You could have said something. You could have just talked to me. I tried, Eleanor replied, unblinking. But you only listen when someone has power, so I decided to earn it. They stood in silence, the tension between them thick as rope. A robin chirped nearby, oblivious to the generational reckoning unfolding between two women who had spent their lives orbiting around each other, but never quite connecting. Vanessa stepped forward. Do you have any idea what this feels like? To be undermined by your own mother, to be manipulated without even knowing it. I didn't manipulate you, Eleanor said. I invested. I supported. I improved. Everything I did made your company better. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. But you took control. No, Eleanor said gently. You gave it to me. You signed the papers. You handed over the reins. I only took responsibility when you started steering off a cliff. The words landed like stones. Vanessa turned away, pacing the walkway. I built that company from scratch. I worked myself to the bone. You think you can just walk in after 60 years of playing the background and take over because you're angry. Asterisk, I didn't take over because I was angry, Eleanor said, her voice firmer now. I took over because I remembered who I was before I gave everything to everyone else. Before I became a supporting character in my own life. Asterisk, Vanessa scoffed. So this is about you now. Great. That's rich. Asterisk, Eleanor took a few steps closer. It's always been about you, Vanessa. Always. From the moment you were born, I gave up everything. My career, my ideas, my time. I didn't resent it. I chose it. But love doesn't mean losing yourself. And when you stood in that room and laughed at me in front of your friends, you didn't just hurt me. You reminded me of everything I'd let slip away. Asterisk, Vanessa's eyes welled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. I didn't mean to. Asterisk, but you did, Eleanor said, her voice breaking just slightly. You meant every word. Because in your world, I was small. I was embarrassing. I was a joke. So I decided to become something else. Silence fell again. Vanessa sat on the edge of the garden bench, her knees weak, her pride in shambles. So, what now? You're CEO. You're going to kick me out. Take the company and run it like a knitting circle. Asterisk, Eleanor's expression didn't flinch. I have no desire to humiliate you. Vanessa, you're still the founder. Still brilliant. But you lost your way. Neuronova became about aesthetics, buzzwords, and surface-level success. You forgot the people it was meant to serve. The mothers, the caretakers, the women who feel invisible. The kind of woman I was. Vanessa lowered her eyes. I launched to Neuronova Grace, Eleanor continued, not because I wanted to replace you, but because I wanted to remind you of the heart of your vision. You used to care about people's stories. Not just their metrics. Asterisk, Vanessa wiped at her face, her voice quieter now. I didn't know how to fix it. Everything was spiraling, and I thought if I made it bigger, shinier, it would survive. Asterisk, you forgot that bigger isn't always better, Eleanor said. Sometimes it's just louder. Asterisk, they sat in stillness for several minutes. The garden hummed with quiet life, bees buzzing lazily between flowers, wind rustling the leaves. The world went on, unbothered by the storm passing between mother and daughter. Asterisk, finally, Vanessa spoke. What do you want from me? Asterisk, Eleanor looked at her directly. I want partnership, not dominance. I want to rebuild what we lost in the company and between us. But only if you're ready to listen this time. To really listen. Asterisk, Vanessa nodded slowly. And if I'm not, asterisk, then I'll keep building without you, Eleanor said, without malice. Because I've found something worth building. Whether or not you walk with me is your choice. Asterisk, Vanessa stood up, her legs shaky. You really built all this in silence, without telling anyone. Asterisk, I've had a lot of practice being quiet, Eleanor said. Now I'm learning how to be heard. Asterisk, Vanessa managed a weak laugh. You're kind of terrifying. You know that. Asterisk, good, Eleanor said. Maybe now you'll pay attention. Asterisk, Vanessa cracked the smallest smile, part wounded, part amused. For the first time, she wasn't looking at her mother as a fragile remnant of the past. She was looking at a woman who had survived, evolved, and outgrown the cage Vanessa had unknowingly built for her. Asterisk, they walked toward the house together, not touching, not talking, but something between them had shifted. Not healed, not yet, but acknowledged. Asterisk inside. Eleanor made tea while Vanessa sat at the kitchen table, glancing around at the simple but warm home she had ignored for years. The photos on the wall, the journals stacked neatly on a shelf, the fresh flowers in a mason jar. It all felt like a museum of quiet strength. Asterisk, I don't want to lose what I built, Vanessa said finally. Then let's rebuild it together, Eleanor replied. Don't know if I can work under you. Asterisk, you won't, Eleanor said. We'll work beside each other, but only if you're willing to change, to learn. Asterisk, Vanessa took a long sip of tea. Then I guess I better start listening. Eleanor smiled, not in triumph, but in relief, because sometimes power wasn't in the fight, but in the hand you extended after the dust had settled. Asterisk, and in that moment, Eleanor knew this wasn't just about reclaiming herself. Asterisk, it was about restoring something even more precious. A bond, long, frayed, but not yet broken. Asterisk, Vanessa didn't return to Neuronova the next day, or the day after that. She stayed home, disconnected from meetings, calendars, and social events, letting the silence surround her like a thick curtain. For years, she had thrived on motion pitch, meetings, product launches, social appearances, headline features. She had built a life so fast-paced and externally impressive that she never had time to question if it still made sense. But now, everything had been forced to a halt. And within that stillness, she began to feel the weight of what she had lost, not just control over her company, but a relationship with her mother that had never truly formed into something honest or whole. The shock of Eleanor's actions still pulsed through her like a bruise that hadn't stopped throbbing. She kept replaying that moment in the garden the way her mother had stood, firm and composed, speaking with clarity and compassion. It rattled her more than any boardroom ambush ever could. Vanessa had always known her mother to be gentle, yes, but passive. A woman of quiet routines and folded hands. What she saw now was a woman of steel, wrapped in patience, someone who had not just risen to meet her challenge, but surpassed her. On the third day, Vanessa sat at her dining table with a legal pad and a pen. Not a laptop, not a phone, just ink and paper. She wrote down a question. What went wrong? She expected her instincts to answer. Eleanor, betrayal, ambush. But as the minutes passed and no satisfying answers came, she slowly began to write a different truth, one that didn't center on blame, but introspection. She listed everything she had neglected over the years. Her team, once vibrant and creative, now suffocated under her micromanagement. The core product, once beloved for its simplicity, now buried under branding gimmicks and hollow features. Her user base, once loyal and passionate, now confused and drifting away. And Eleanor, her mother, who had quietly watched her daughter build a throne on shaky ground, never once asked to sit beside her until now. Vanessa didn't cry, not yet, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ashamed not because of what had been done to her, but because of what she had done to others. When she finally returned to the office, the mood was different. People looked at her not with fear or awe, but curiosity, almost caution. It was the first time she had walked into that space and not felt like the uncontested ruler, and perhaps, she realized, that was a good thing. Mason greeted her with a nod. Glad you're back. I needed time, she replied. Things are moving, he said. Neuronova Grace is scaling beautifully. The response from senior wellness communities is phenomenal. We've had 3 acquisition offers for Grace already. Vanessa raised her eyebrows. Are we considering them? Not seriously, Mason said. Eleanor believes we're only scratching the surface. Vanessa didn't flinch at the mention of her mother's name. She nodded. She's right. He blinked. You okay? I'm learning to be, she said. Later that afternoon, she asked to sit in on the Grace team's development session. It was the first time she had entered the conference room without presenting, dictating, or correcting. She sat near the back, took notes, and watched her developers speak with enthusiasm she hadn't seen in years. One of them, a young UX designer named Priya, hesitated before addressing her. Vanessa, would you be open to joining a focus group session next week? We're inviting users, mostly older women, and it might be helpful to have you there, just to listen. Vanessa nodded. Yes, I'd like that. She stayed quiet for the rest of the session, absorbing everything. Their language was no longer just about features and timelines. It was about empathy, connection, dignity. It reminded her of her original pitch deck for Neuronova, the one she had written long before funding and fame, the one that spoke of healing, of stories, of building technology that felt human. That night, Vanessa visited her mother again, but not in anger. This time, she brought something with her, an envelope containing her original handwritten vision statement, dated 6 years back. Eleanor opened the door and stepped aside silently, allowing Vanessa in. They sat across from each other in the same kitchen as before. Vanessa placed the envelope on the table. I found it, she said. My original vision. It wasn't about sleekness or expansion, or Forbes lists. It was about making space for people to be seen. Eleanor opened the envelope and read the page quietly. When she looked up, her eyes glistened. This is the Vanessa I remembered. I lost her, Vanessa admitted. Somewhere between pitch decks and ego. You can find her again, Eleanor said, but not alone. They talked until midnight. Not just about business, but about everything they had never dared to speak of before. Vanessa asked about Eleanor's past, her dreams, her journals, the things she never finished, and Eleanor, for the first time in decades, opened up fully. She told her daughter about the fear of vanishing, the ache of being needed but never seen, the years she felt like a ghost in her own home, useful only when someone else needed something. Vanessa listened, really listened, and in doing so, something between them softened. The next week brought transformation not just for their relationship, but for the company itself. Eleanor made her first official appearance at a town hall meeting, standing beside Vanessa, addressing the team not as a secret investor, but as a partner. I'm not here to take over, Eleanor said, her voice clear and warm. I'm here to rebuild with all of you. This company is not just lines of code or graphs on a screen. It's a living thing powered by stories, by empathy, by purpose, and I want us to return to that. The team applauded. Some cried. Vanessa watched her mother with admiration. For the first time, she saw not an old woman, not a maternal figure, not even a quiet investor, but a leader. In the following months, Neuronova underwent a rebirth. The Grace platform was integrated into the main app as a central feature rather than a side project. A new initiative called Echo Circles was launched in line communities led by licensed therapists and peer moderators. These weren't just chat rooms, they were sanctuaries, spaces where women young and old share, heal, and grow together. Vanessa focused her energy on product development and storytelling. She led a campaign called Founders in the Family, highlighting stories of women over 50 who had launched ventures in later life. Eleanor, despite her reservations, agreed to be featured in the first episode. The video went viral, not because of marketing tricks, but because of truth. In it, Eleanor spoke plainly. I spent 60 years being useful, but now, I want to be powerful, and I want other women to know that it's never too late to begin again. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from around the world. Eleanor received invitations to speak at women's conferences, tech panels, and even guest lecture at universities. She declined most of them, preferring to stay behind the scenes, but the impact was undeniable. One afternoon, Vanessa found Eleanor in her office, reading a letter from a user named Maribel. She's 67, Eleanor said. She used to think she was too old to matter. Now she moderates one of the Echo Circles and teaches mindfulness through painting. She says we gave her a second life. Vanessa smiled. You did that. We did, Eleanor corrected her. The tension that had once hung over them like a cloud was gone. They still disagreed at times, sometimes fiercely, but now those disagreements came from mutual respect, not imbalance. They were no longer mother and daughter caught in a silent war of disappointment. They were partners, allies. On the day Neuronova reached its 1 millionth active user, the company held a small celebration. There was no grand stage or flashy presentation, just a simple party in the office, with homemade snacks, music, and laughter. Eleanor stood quietly in the corner, watching it all with pride. Vanessa approached her, holding 2 cups of punch. To the joke who now owns a startup, she said, raising one. Eleanor raised her glass back, and to the daughter who finally listened. They clinked glasses, and for the first time in both their lives, they felt not like competitors or opposites, but like equals. It hadn't been easy. It had taken confrontation, confession, and the courage to change. But somewhere between broken pride and rebuilt purpose, they had found something far more lasting than revenge or redemption. They had found each other. The weeks following the company's cultural shift felt like a warm spring after a long, hard winter. Neuronova, once rigid and corporate, now felt alive again, human, collaborative, and centered on impact rather than image. Employees walked through the hallways with smiles that reached their eyes. Conversations were filled with real ideas rather than buzzwords, and the Grace platform, which had once been a quiet beta project, had blossomed into a flagship service used by thousands. But the most surprising transformation wasn't within the app or even the staff. It was within Vanessa. She had once lived on adrenaline, early morning interviews, ruthless negotiations, and tightly managed public appearances. But now she found herself starting her mornings differently, journaling, listening to audio reflections on empathy, even taking long walks before stepping into her office. These weren't just wellness habits, they were the very tools Neuronova had designed, now being embraced by its own founder. For the first time, Vanessa wasn't just selling healing, she was participating in it. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old instincts flared impatience, control, ego, but each time she faltered, she remembered the garden confrontation with her mother, Eleanor's calm strength, and the long silence that followed the truth. That memory anchored her. One morning, Vanessa received an invitation to speak at a National Innovation Summit. The theme, Second Chances, Rebuilding with Purpose. She immediately thought of Eleanor. Without her, there would have been no grace, no transformation, no second act for either of them. She showed Eleanor the invitation later that afternoon. "They want me to speak," she said, placing the envelope on the kitchen table. Eleanor glanced at it, her brow raised. "About what?" About how the company changed. "How I changed." "Will you tell the truth?" Eleanor asked softly. Vanessa didn't hesitate. "Yes, but I want you to join me." Eleanor's lips parted slightly. "Me? Speak publicly." "You're the reason we're here. You taught me more in 6 months than I learned in 6 years of running a company." Eleanor looked down, her hands resting gently on her teacup. "I'm not a stage person, Vanessa." "You don't have to be perfect," Vanessa said. "Just be you. That's what saved this company." Eleanor smiled, the kind that carried weight. "I'll think about it." The day of the summit arrived a week later. Vanessa wore a simple navy pantsuit, no flash, no brand labels. She had learned that humility traveled farther than fashion. Eleanor, after much persuading, joined her, wearing a soft cream shawl and modest earrings, her version of armor. The event was held in a grand auditorium filled with CEOs, policymakers, and young entrepreneurs eager to change the world. As Vanessa walked up to the stage, she noticed the banners flanking the walls. "Innovation is not just invention, it's reinvention." She cleared her throat at the podium. 6 years ago, I launched a wellness startup that promised to help people heal. But somewhere along the way, I stopped listening to my users, my team, and most importantly, to the one person who had always been quietly watching, my mother. The audience sat up. Vanessa turned to Eleanor, who sat just off stage. "Today, I want to share a story, not of success, but of redirection. Of what happens when a company loses its heart and what it takes to find it again." She invited Eleanor to join her. Eleanor stepped up slowly, clutching a few index cards. She took her place beside Vanessa and looked out at the crowd. Her voice was clear, gentle, and unwavering. "I never thought I'd be speaking to a room like this," she began. "I've spent most of my life behind the curtain, raising a daughter, managing a household, giving up dreams quietly. But somewhere in that silence, I realized I still had something to say, and more importantly, something to build." For the next 15 minutes, they told their story, the mockery at the birthday party, the secret investment, the internal shift at Neuronova. They spoke of betrayal, but also growth, of failure, but also forgiveness. They didn't glamorize their journey. They told it raw, without filters. When they finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. But more than that, dozens of people stood up, not out of politeness, but reverence. Vanessa's social media exploded that evening, not with selfies or tech reviews, but with stories from women and men who had felt sidelined by age, grief, or past mistakes, now feeling seen. Later that night, as they sat together in their hotel room overlooking the city skyline, Eleanor turned to Vanessa. "You were brilliant." Vanessa looked at her. "You were brave." Eleanor sipped her tea. "I wasn't sure I'd be able to speak, but when I saw their faces, I remembered all the times I thought my voice didn't matter. I didn't want another woman to feel that." Vanessa nodded. "You're not just my mother anymore. You're my partner, my co-founder, the soul of Neuronova." Eleanor chuckled. "That's quite a title for a woman who just learned how to use Slack." They laughed together, and in that moment, all the years of misunderstanding seemed to dissolve. Back at the office, the momentum from the summit sparked new initiatives. Neuronova launched a program called Second Bloom, specifically designed for individuals starting over in midlife. It included mentorship, skill-building workshops, and a wellness curriculum developed by Eleanor herself. It became one of the company's most beloved features, drawing attention from global wellness foundations. Vanessa spearheaded a podcast series titled Begin Again, inviting guests who had reinvented themselves after 50. Eleanor was the first guest. Her episode, titled The Quiet Revolution, went viral within days. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do, she said in the episode, is believe you are not done yet. That line was quoted everywhere, from newspapers to graduation speeches to a TEDx talk by a 70-year-old startup founder who credited Eleanor for her courage. But Eleanor didn't let the attention change her. She still returned home each night to her garden, still wore the same worn slippers in the kitchen, still drank her favorite brand of jasmine tea. Fame hadn't found her, it had followed her, and she never let it lead. As for Vanessa, she became a different kind of CEO, one who asked more questions than she answered, who paused before reacting, who gave credit freely, and she found that in giving up her need for control, she gained something better, trust. One afternoon, months later, as they walked through a new Neuronova community center being built in Eleanor's old neighborhood, Vanessa paused beside a large mural on the wall. It depicted a woman with silver hair planting seeds, surrounded by blooming trees. Beneath it were the words, "She was told her season had passed, so she made her own spring." Eleanor stared at it for a long time. "Did you write that?" she asked. Vanessa nodded. "Inspired by you." Eleanor touched the painted petals. "It's beautiful." They stood there together, quiet, content, united not by blood alone, but by legacy. Because in the end, this story was never just about vengeance or redemption. It was about voice. It was about change. It was about what happens when a woman, at any age, decides to stop being silent and start being seen. And for Eleanor Whitmore and her daughter Vanessa, it was only the beginning of everything. Autumn had settled in gently over the city. The trees lining Eleanor's neighborhood blazed with amber and crimson, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze like quiet applause for a life slowly being reborn. The scent of cinnamon and dry wood drifted through the air. And as Eleanor sat by her living room window with a thick shawl draped over her shoulders, she allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. For the first time in decades, she wasn't rushing to clean up someone else's mess, wasn't making herself small to keep the peace, and wasn't quietly swallowing disappointment. Her hands wrapped around a warm mug, her thoughts drifting back to how far things had come, not just for her, but for her daughter, for the company, for the thousands of women now using Neuronova Grace as a part of their daily ritual. What had once started as a quiet rebellion, a private decision to reclaim dignity, had grown into a social wave of reinvention. And it had all begun with the moment Eleanor had decided she wasn't a joke. The house had changed. It was still the same modest home with creaky floorboards and chipped paint, but emotionally, where there had once been silence and loneliness, there was now purpose and occasional laughter. Vanessa visited regularly, not out of guilt or duty, but with sincerity. Sometimes she brought takeout. Sometimes she brought a stack of proposals to discuss. Other times, she brought nothing but herself, and that, Eleanor had learned, was the greatest gift of all. One evening, Vanessa arrived with a strange look on her face, part excitement, part worry. I have something to show you, she said, dropping her bag on the kitchen chair. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Should I be nervous? Maybe a little, Vanessa replied, pulling out a sleek portfolio. We've been approached by a major wellness tech fund. They want to partner with us, maybe even fold us into their global platform. It's a huge opportunity. Eleanor frowned slightly, setting her mug aside. That sounds big. They love Grace. They love the Second Bloom program, but they're asking for partial acquisition. We'd keep our branding and most of our team, but they'd technically own the framework. Eleanor said nothing. Her fingers tapped the table. Slowly, Vanessa waited. After a long pause, Eleanor asked, what would we gain? Resources, global reach, better infrastructure, and more time. We could focus on building rather than managing every department. And what would we lose? Vanessa didn't answer immediately. She knew her mother was no longer someone to placate or distract. Some control, and probably some soul. Not all, but enough. Eleanor nodded slowly. And what do you want to do? Vanessa leaned forward, I want to say no, but I need to hear that from you. Asterisk, Eleanor smiled faintly. You already know my answer. They didn't sign. Instead, they doubled down on what made Neuronova different: intimacy, authenticity, and community. They hired more moderators from within the user base. They created a line of physical journals and self-care kits inspired by Eleanor's own therapeutic practices. And most importantly, they launched the Grace Archive, a digital repository where women from all over the world could upload personal stories of transformation. Asterisk, each story was vetted, preserved, and then published with care, some anonymously, some proudly attributed. There were letters from widows who had rediscovered painting, from breast cancer survivors starting online support circles, from retirees going back to school. Grace had become more than an app. It was a mirror, reflecting strength back to the women who had forgotten their own power. Asterisk, one day, Eleanor was scrolling through the archive when she came across a familiar name: Denise Holloway, an old friend from Eleanor's childhood, long lost to the decades. The story was short but powerful. Denise had found the app after her husband's passing, and in her submission, she wrote, "I used to think starting over at 70 was absurd. Now I think not starting over would have been the real tragedy." Asterisk, Eleanor reached out. They reconnected over coffee weeks later, and it was like finding a missing puzzle piece she didn't know she had misplaced. Denise had opened a community art space in her neighborhood, offering free classes for senior citizens and at-risk teens. When Eleanor told her about Neuronova's mission, Denise cried, Asterisk, "I always knew you had this in you," she said, holding Eleanor's hand. "Even back then, you saw people. You really saw them." Asterisk, Eleanor went home that night and opened her very first journal, the one she had written in secret when Vanessa was a toddler. The pages were filled with dreams, ideas for a wellness garden, a memoir, community spaces. They had once seemed like fantasies too far removed from reality. But now, as she read them, they felt like blueprints. Asterisk, she began to write again, not for business, not for therapy, but for herself. Pages filled with memories, reflections, poetry. It wasn't for publication. It was for clarity, for closure, for celebration. Asterisk, meanwhile, Vanessa had her own transformation unfolding. Asterisk, she had started mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially women who felt unseen in the tech world. At one event, a nervous 25-year-old asked her, "What's the secret to bouncing back after everything falls apart?" Asterisk, Vanessa paused for a long time before answering. "It's not about bouncing back. It's about standing still long enough to understand why you fell, and then deciding which direction is actually worth walking toward." Asterisk, her mentorship style wasn't flashy. She didn't offer shortcuts, but what she did offer was real guidance, encouragement, accountability, and for many, that was enough to change the course of their lives. Asterisk, one afternoon, as Vanessa walked through the Neuronova office, she noticed a new intern, barely 20, staring nervously at a complex data visualization. Asterisk, "Need help?" Vanessa asked gently. Asterisk, the girl turned, startled. Oh, I didn't know you worked here. I mean, I knew, but I didn't think you just walk around." Asterisk, Vanessa laughed. "It's my company. Of course I walk around." Asterisk, the intern smiled awkwardly. "It's just, you're kind of a legend now. The woman who almost lost her company and then built it better with her mom." Asterisk, Vanessa's smile softened. "I didn't build it better. I learned how to let better be built. Big difference." Asterisk, the girl blinked. "That's really cool." Asterisk, "Let me show you something," Vanessa said, pointing to the screen. "These numbers, they're stories. That's what my mom taught me. Never forget the story behind the data." The intern nodded, writing it down. Back at home, Eleanor had taken on another project, something deeply personal. She began hosting monthly gatherings in her living room, inviting women in the neighborhood for storytelling evenings. There was no agenda, no formal discussion, just tea, candles, and a space where people could speak and be heard. Asterisk, the first time, only 4 women showed up. The second time, it was 11. By the 4th month, she had to move the gathering to the local community hall. Asterisk, they called it Evening Echoes. Asterisk, word spread, and soon there were echo circles popping up in other cities. Small, intimate groups, started by Grace users, inspired by Eleanor's idea. Neuronova supported them quietly, offering kits, resources, and virtual support. One day, Eleanor stood in the back of one such gathering in Chicago, watching women from different generations and backgrounds laugh, cry, and hold space for each other. She felt a lump rise in her throat, not of sorrow, but of fulfillment. Vanessa stood beside her. "You did this," she whispered. Eleanor shook her head. "We did." By the time winter rolled in, Eleanor had become a quiet icon in circles she never expected to influence. She was interviewed by lifestyle magazines, honored at a national conference on intergenerational innovation, and invited to speak at a United Nations panel on age-inclusive wellness solutions. She declined the UN, though, too many lights, too many people. Instead, she stayed home, tending to her tulips and writing her story. Not to prove anything, just to remember everything, because even though she had changed the world for so many, the most profound change had occurred within her. The woman who once sat alone in a corner at her own birthday party, humiliated and forgotten, was now the anchor of a movement built on love, renewal, and unapologetic visibility. And as the first snow began to fall outside her window, Eleanor looked out not with longing, but with peace. She had planted her spring in the dead of winter, and now it bloomed everywhere. Snow fell in soft spirals outside Eleanor's window, blanketing the streets and rooftops in a hush that made the world seem brand new. The fireplace crackled gently in the background, casting a golden glow across the living room walls where pictures now hung of community gatherings, podcast recordings, and press clippings celebrating Neuronova's remarkable transformation. But Eleanor wasn't looking at any of those. Her gaze was fixed on a single envelope on her coffee table, its return address bearing the name of her daughter's startup still proudly hers, still equally Eleanor's. She had received countless letters over the past year, thank you notes, media inquiries, invitations, but this envelope was different. It wasn't printed, it was handwritten, and the handwriting, though rushed and angular, was unmistakable. Vanessa's with steady hands. Eleanor opened it. Inside was a letter not typed, not polished, but raw and honest, like breath on a cold window. Mom. I'm writing this not as the CEO of Neuronova, not as a speaker or a founder or even as a daughter trying to make something up to you. I'm writing this as a woman who finally understands what it means to be seen not by the world, but by herself. It took everything we went through, the pain, the confrontation, the quiet rebuilding for me to realize that the most powerful thing we've done isn't launch a new product or reach 1 million users. It's that we found each other again. Or maybe we found each other for the first time. You didn't just save the company, you saved me. From myself. From the image I was trying so hard to protect. From the belief that strength meant being alone. And so this is not a letter of apology. It's a letter of gratitude. Thank you for becoming more than a mother when I needed a guide. Thank you for showing me that power has nothing to do with noise and everything to do with truth. Thank you for never giving up on your voice, even when no one including me was listening. Happy 1-year anniversary of grace. I love you. Vanessa. Eleanor read the letter 3 times before setting it down. Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Not out of restraint, but out of peace. The kind of peace that comes only after a storm has passed and the sky clears without needing to be perfect. The kind that says, we made it. The anniversary of Nerf Grace wasn't just a celebration of an app's success, it was a marker of transformation, of a story that had begun with bitterness and silence, and ended with mutual recognition. Across the world, Neuronova Grace now had over 1.8 million users. Echo Circles had expanded to 300 cities. The Begin Again podcast had climbed into the top 10 wellness charts, but for Eleanor, none of that mattered as much as the letter sitting gently on her lap. The next day, the company hosted a quiet gathering to commemorate the milestone. They didn't want a massive event, just something sincere. Employees, therapists, partners, and core users gathered in the Neuronova Community Center, now lovingly nicknamed the Heart Room by the staff. Vanessa and Eleanor arrived together, hand in hand. The murmurs that once followed Eleanor's entrance with awe now greeted her with familiarity. She had become not just the co-owner, but the soul of the organization. The woman who had turned pain into purpose, silence into structure, invisibility into influence. There was a stage, yes, but no speeches were scheduled. Instead, people took the microphone one by one, not to boast, but to share. Asterisk, a grandmother from Florida, spoke about reconnecting with her estranged daughter through one of the Grace journaling exercises. Cancer survivor from Montana tearfully described how the community circles gave her strength to face her treatments with dignity. Asterisk, a retired nurse from Detroit said she'd always wanted to mentor but never knew how until Second Bloom helped her build an online mentorship hub for young women in medicine. Asterisk, Vanessa watched them all with quiet reverence, her hand never letting go of her mother's. Asterisk, finally, someone in the audience stood and said, "We'd like to hear from Eleanor." The room clapped gently, urging her forward. Eleanor stood, walking slowly to the microphone. She wasn't nervous. She no longer feared being seen. Asterisk, she smiled softly and said, "I never thought I'd be here. 1 year ago, I sat in a room full of people who laughed at me. I was called a joke. I was treated like I was done. The audience fell completely silent. But now I understand that being underestimated is not an insult. It's an invitation. An invitation to surprise them, and more importantly, to surprise yourself." She paused, letting that land. "I didn't set out to teach anyone a lesson. I just wanted to remember what it felt like to matter. And in doing so, I remembered something else, that dignity is not something others give you. It's something you claim." Asterisk, she looked toward Vanessa. "My daughter and I had to break apart to finally come together. And that's okay. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about making space for change, for truth, for each other." Tears flowed freely now, from audience members and from Vanessa herself. Eleanor finished, her voice gentle but resonant. "So to every woman out there who thinks it's too late, who believes the best chapters of her life are behind, I want to say this: you're not a punchline, you're a prologue, and your story is just beginning." Asterisk, the applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was intimate. It wasn't meant to lift the roof, it was meant to wrap around the room like a blanket. Asterisk, after the event, Eleanor stepped out into the snowy courtyard where a bench had been installed beneath the small plaque. Vanessa joined her. The plaque read, "In honor of Eleanor Whitmore. Asterisk, for reminding us that silence can bloom into strength." Asterisk, Vanessa ran her fingers across the engraving. "Do you like it?" Asterisk, Eleanor nodded, touched, "Very much." Asterisk, they sat side by side on the bench, watching the snow fall around them. People moved in and out of the building behind them. Hugs exchanged, photos taken, laughter echoing into the air. The company that had once been fueled by ego and ambition now pulsed with connection. Asterisk, Vanessa turned to her mother. "I used to think legacy was about leaving something behind." Asterisk, and now? Eleanor asked. Asterisk, "I think it's about living something forward." Asterisk, Eleanor smiled. "That sounds like something worth doing." Asterisk, as dusk settled, they rose from the bench. Eleanor paused, looked around, and said quietly, "You know, I don't think I need anything more." Asterisk, Vanessa took her arm. "Then maybe we give more instead." Asterisk, and they walked away, not into a sunset, not into the final scene of a story, but into the quiet, gentle continuation of one. Asterisk, because while pain had started their journey, and pride had nearly ended it, it was love that redefined it. Not the loud, cinematic kind, but the kind that sits beside you on cold benches, that writes letters instead of emails, that says "I'm sorry" without saying it aloud, and that chooses to build instead of burn. Asterisk, Eleanor had once believed her life was in its final chapters. Asterisk, but now, she knew better. She was still writing, and this time, every word belonged to her. Asterisk,